Hello, welcome to the Exchange Podcast. Third time's a charm. We're going to see if this actually works. And got a little bit of a lag. If you hear that, I am running this for a reason because I want to see if we're even on today. I don't know, just having all kinds of problems. I don't know what the deal is. But we are on, and I will send that away. Thank you for hanging out with us. If you could see the look on my face, it is one of extreme frustration. Had a lot been wanting to talk about. We are back. Last week was, I'm going to say this again, last week was a turning point for the Exchange Podcast. We had a lot of great feedback. We had some great photos taken to kind of give a face. If you haven't, go to the Exchange Podcast Facebook page. And we've got some photos posted there. We had a guest on, Darren English. It was a great podcast. I feel like I do believe that the podcast turned a corner. And so what's going on here is over the course of the next little while, it won't be weekly, but we're talking about Ephesians 4:11 and the fivefold ministry. As the creator and slash, I hate putting the word leader on my title on my name for anything, but leader for lack of better words. You got to kind of track and see where things are going. And so I've kind of been looking at that. I mean, I think here we are 2.5 years into this podcast, and I think we've just now, which is not atypical, we've kind of reached our stride. And we're getting there. Things are happening. We're at episode 94. Some good things and some things like today that just makes me want to take the computer and the whole thing and throw it away. But we don't. So a third time's a charm. Michael, say hello to everyone, please.
Hey, we're glad to actually be up and running now. It's been a huge source of frustration, but we're glad to have you with us and hope this finds you in a good place.
Yes, and if you can hear us, please drop a line and just say hello. To make certain that I know we're there and that we're coming through. It seems to be the 15-minute lag that is on is, that's from the old TV days. That's, if somebody drops a word that they shouldn't, you can kind of mute it. But hey, this podcast, it's family safe. A lot's been going on in the world. We were going to talk. I actually was going to. I had texted you earlier in the week and said that we would talk about Assad, which we will. I was trying to bring on a guest, and we were going to talk about Kings of Tupelo, and of course you've not heard about it, so it wouldn't work. And the guest that I'm trying to bring on, he and I were in Tupelo kind of around the time that all that was going on. We don't know any of the people there. We don't know. Or he does. The names there, I do know the names for a few different reasons, but kind of shed a little bit of light on that docu-series. But anyway, what's going on? I have, I guess, mixed emotions about the whole thing with Syria because Syria is a Christian country. And now to correct it, you said that the guy who's coming in now was a former member of Al Qaeda.
Yeah, but he's okay now. So his name, for any of those wondering, is Mohammed al-Bashir. Is a former member of Al Qaeda who is now serving as the interim prime minister in the opposition government that has overthrown Assad. I really believe that this will be a bad move for women and for...
It didn't work out well in Iran, did it?
No, and for Christians. I guess time will tell, but I think the U.S. obviously was involved. According to CENTCOM, we dropped over 200 munitions in Syria. And you've got several opposing forces all encroaching into Syria from different directions. And the only thing I could think of was like Poland during World War II, where you had the Germans come in moving eastward and you had the Russians come in moving westward. I think that it is a potential powder keg, because you still have the Russians who backed Assad in Tartus. They have a naval port there, or a naval base that they leased from Assad's Syrian government, and they said that they plan on keeping that intact. So you have the Russians there, and then obviously Turkey is coming in from the north. Turkey is a member of NATO. For those of you who don't know, they've been a member since 1952.
Kind of sounds like the coalition that Ezekiel and Revelation talk about.
Well, and then you've got Israel coming up through the Golan Heights. And I believe the last time I saw, they were 20-something miles from Damascus. They want to create a buffer zone because the guy who was taking over is former Al Qaeda.
Well, it's what's the old statement? The devil I know. When they removed Saddam Hussein and then they removed Muammar Gaddafi, that gave rise to ISIS. And I was talking to someone about this last night. People do not. Again, we're gonna. We refer to the show Blacklist on here a lot, and that show really best represented what a strong man was for. Raymond Reddington had the goods on everybody, and anybody that stepped out of line, he just quickly killed them. He did things that the U.S. government. In fact, one of the episodes, he says, you wonder why when you come to the devil to do the devil's bidding, why it is that the devil acts the way he does. Paraphrasing that, but when you put people like Saddam Hussein in and Muammar Gaddafi, they were there for a reason, and then when they were removed, it became very chaotic because the people that they were keeping at bay are now in power. And that is what my biggest concern is with Assad fleeing to Russia, which, hey, by the way, he goes to Russia. I think a lot of this is being deliberately designed to keep the incoming administration from being effective. All they got to do is keep him ineffective for 12 months, because then after that, everybody's going to start their re-election bids for the midterms. This is why that Christians, and I have said since the election, since the election night, well, before election, and not just me, but several people. Again, the conversation I was having with last night was with a pastor. And he made the statement. He said, Christians are going to have to realize that these next 4 years is just a break that God's giving to the church to get the gospel out. That's it. This is not for you to go out there and make your bank account flush. Nothing wrong with that, but that's not what this is about.
No, and I think that this was yet another jab at Russia, because, Assad was allied with Russia and Iran.
Yeah.
And it's another provocation. The West really seems intent on a conflict with Russia.
Yeah.
We just fired more ATACMS missiles into Russia, which were supplied to the Ukrainians by the U.S.
Yeah.
Which means that there are U.S. personnel showing them how to use them or operating them. Mm-hmm. The Storm Shadow missiles that the British fired into Russia, eventually it will culminate. Like I said, my concern with Syria is you still have the Russians there.
Yeah.
You have Turkey, who is a member of NATO. You've got American troops there. You've got Israeli troops there. It's not a geographically large area, and you're putting all these opposing forces in close proximity. And then you've got, the opposition who has overthrown Assad, who is now Al Qaeda, they keep saying former Al Qaeda, but he really doesn't seem, in my eyes, to have transitioned too far away from those beliefs.
Yeah.
It's a variable powder keg. it'll be interesting to see how they operate. And, you know, Turkey wants Israel out of Syria. Okay, and when you have two countries that are supposed to be our allies that are at odds, I mean, it'll be interesting to see how the administration handles that.
Well, in Ezekiel chapter 38, it talks about the coalition of nations. And again, I'm always a little bit leery about getting into a lot of Bible prophecy because a lot of it is speculation at best. But I'll give you what Josephus, the Jewish historian, you know, the nations are going to be Magog, Rosh, Meshech, or Tubal, which is modern day Turkey, Persia, which is modern day Iran, Cush, it's often translated as Ethiopia, is not the same as modern Ethiopia. It represented the land south of Egypt. Today, this nation is Sudan. Put, also translated in some versions as Libya. Gomer, which is part of modern day Turkey, and then Beth Togarmah, part of modern day Turkey. So we see, and you mentioned Turkey. Turkey is one of the biggest players in that coalition of nations. And, you know, let's look at Turkey. I mean, Turkey was what is their capitals? The capital of Turkey now. What is the name of it?
Had you not asked me, I probably could.
It used to be Constantinople, and now I can't think of but it was changed because of
the Muslims.
The Muslims. And when you look at modern day Turks today, most of them are very dark skinned and brown eyed. In the early days, they weren't. A lot of them were blonde hair and blue eyed. And you say, well, why does that matter? It matters because what you mentioned earlier about how that is going to play out for women. Well, we've seen how that's played out in Iran for women. Christianity has been Judaism and Christianity have been champions for women's liberty. I'll give you an example. When we study the story of Esther and Ahasuerus, and that was the wife of the king before Esther, and the whole reason that she was removed was because I believe it was Artaxerxes, who was the king at that time. He wanted to parade her around in front of all of his men to show, you know, his trophy wife, basically. She was a modern day women's lib. She was really a modern day, or she was really kind of an ancient world feminist, and not that what she did was wrong. I agreed her for it. She tells him no. Well, the Jews still to this day, the night before, I believe it's Rosh. How do you say that? Rosh Hashanah or something. I can't remember the name of it. I'll look it up.
Rosh Hashanah.
Rosh Hashanah, yes. The night before that, they actually celebrate Ahasuerus. I believe is how you say her name. They celebrate her because she stood up to the king, gambling it all away. I do too. Because while a woman is, yes, the Bible tells us that she is to be a servant, or not a servant, sorry. She is to be submissive to her husband. Husbands are also supposed to be submissive. And I want to say something. I want everybody to understand what I'm getting ready to say here. There's a modern theology that the Holy Spirit is a woman. That is not the truth. That is, he's a spirit, and all the attributes given to him are male. There are a few places that do attribute a feminine quality, and one is in Proverbs. There's a couple in Psalms, and then there's another major one, a big one. But again, I want everybody to understand this podcast. I do not believe the Holy Spirit is a woman. All the attributes are of the male gender, but it doesn't matter because God is a spirit, and those that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. But when Jesus came in the form of a male. So I want everybody to, before you lose your heads over what I'm getting ready to say, I do not believe the Holy Spirit's a woman. But there's a big one. And the Bible says about the Holy Spirit, Jesus said that he will be a helper. He will be a paraclete. He will guide us into all truths and righteousness. Go back to the Old Testament. What does God say in the Old Testament? It is not good for man to be alone. So he gave him a helpmeet or a helpmate. And he says that he caused Adam to fall into a deep sleep, and he took a rib from Adam's side. The woman is not less than the man. As a matter of fact, what the Christian marriage is designed to do is to show the relationship of God with man. Marriage is there to make us holy. It is not there to make us happy. The Holy Spirit does not always make us happy. Yeah. he guides us into truth and wisdom, and there's things that we may want to do that the Holy Spirit says you cannot do and be a Christian.
Because there's many things in the flesh that are a direct contradiction to what he wants you to do.
Yes. Yes. And so the wife's role very much resembles the working of the Holy Spirit in the life of the believer. It's all wrapped up. I mean, I was having this conversation, man. I was so invigorated last night. I was having this conversation with a pastor. And I mean, the conversation was going great. And the whole Bible is just all wrapped up and bundled so nicely. That's the reason why when you had, 40 some authors from various walks of life.
45 authors on 3 different continents, 66 books.
And they're all coming from various, right there. I mean, you just hit it. 45 authors, 3 different continents, 66 books. And all of that is, all the trains are going to the same station.
Yeah. There's 63,000 cross-references.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd like to see the work of one person be able to cross-reference themselves that many times, much less 45 over 1,500 years.
That's right.
I mean, it's not humanly possible.
No. And that is the reason. And so when you look at that, to go around the world on what I just said, when you look at what Judeo-Christianity has done for the upward mobility and the uplifting of women across the world, you know that when a religion like Islam comes in and they do to women what they do, that is the spirit of the Antichrist.
Well, and it's definitely going to pose a problem for women in the region, with the wearing of burqas where nothing but the eyes can be seen. And they will undoubtedly see their liberties taken away.
Yes.
And, we had talked about Saddam Hussein or Gaddafi. Look at when the U.S. government, because don't kid yourself, we were deeply involved in the removal of Assad.
Yeah.
When we remove these so-called dictators.
Where does Trump stand on that? Do we know? I've not really heard.
I don't think I've really heard a whole lot either.
I'm hoping he is not for it. I really am.
Well, we create this power vacuum where we were responsible for the rise of ISIS.
Yeah.
I mean, it was so, once again, if we go back to, let's look at Saddam Hussein. He was trained by the CIA.
Yeah.
He was put in power by us.
Well, and that's kind of this whole thing with Kings of Tupelo. The main guy who was kind of the fall guy, he had been trained by the CIA. So there is this far-reaching thing about our Department of the Department of the Department of Justice, the DOJ. I'm sorry, my words were. That was Chandler. He just sent me a message. We might try to go ahead and get our guests back here in just a second. But the Department of Justice needs to. I know you can't just necessarily abolish it, but I do think it needs to be abolished at the federal level.
Well, there certainly needs to be more legitimate oversight. If you're going to retain some of these agencies, there needs to be more accountability. A lot of what the CIA does, even presidents aren't privy to what they're doing. It's kind of like a shadow government that's acting in their own interest, with no real oversight from any of the other branches. But like we used Saddam Hussein to keep Iran in check. And then upon his removal, the country is plunged into chaos. Iran has certainly grown in power and has become I wouldn't say they're the greatest threat to the U.S., but they've become more significant.
Yeah.
And then you have certain outgoing administrations that give them billions of dollars.
Yeah.
Which they're not going to use for the betterment of their country. They're going to use it for the detriment of ours.
Well, that is the problem with the illegal immigration, is the fact that many of them are coming here and working and then sending billions of dollars out of the country. And I get it. I understand the concept. But eventually everything is designed, and it will collapse. It will collapse.
Well, and you've got people, our politicians, taking it further now in direct opposition to Tom Homan.
Yeah.
And the incoming administration, where they're saying they're going to pay for everything for illegal immigrants.
Yeah.
They're going to have super sanctuary cities or states, and they're going to cover all of their costs, and you don't even do that for your own citizens.
Yeah.
They're just doing everything they can to stand in direct opposition to Trump and what they're trying to accomplish.
Now, I'm going to ask this question, because what we're going to get is a lot of people that are going to say, yeah, but you know what? Jesus and Mary and Joseph were all illegal immigrants, and when we kick the illegal immigrants out, we're kicking Jesus, Mary, and Joseph out. We're kicking baby Jesus out. Their belief is that Christians and the church should just be readily acceptable of people just coming across the border. What do you say?
Well, I don't disagree with legal immigration.
No.
There needs to be a vetting process.
Yeah.
Okay. There are millions of people coming into this country, many of which we know for a fact are murderers, rapists, terrorists. You've got Chinese nationals, you've got Africans, you have people from all over, in parts of the world that we are certainly not allied with or are outright enemies of this country, streaming in. If you're concerned about any kind of security, you should not allow unvetted immigration. And the fact that they're saying it's upwards of 21 million people, even if you look at it statistically and say only 1% are bad, that's still a significant number of people who intend to do you harm. Would you leave your door open and allow anyone off the street to come into your home? If you're not willing to do that, you're not willing to let every Joe Schmo in Little Rock come into your home, then you really shouldn't allow your country to be in the same circumstance.
All right, I think we got our guests back. Can you hear us, and can you say something?
Yes, I can hear you.
All right, awesome. Thank you. And welcome to the podcast. I know you will, but I'm just going to go ahead and give you the rundown of what we do. And that's basically, let's just keep the language family friendly. I know you will. I do that with every guest. Anyway, say hello to everybody.
Oh, hey everybody, how's it going?
So this is somebody that I've known for I think you and I met I believe it
2000?
was 2000. Yeah. So I've known this guy for about 24 years. And, and so I, you and I actually, and we'll kind of segue a little bit into the other conversation that we were kind of talking
Oh
about.
yeah, yeah.
But before we do, you and I had a conversation last week, and I don't know if you've been listening to the podcast up to this point or not. But anyway, I don't. He doesn't care. I'll give his name. It is Justin Stevens, who is on our podcast today. I know you're kind of closely related a little bit to the whole things going on in Syria, because
Oh yeah.
you're a Greek Orthodox Christian. You've got a lot of friends who are from that part of the world, and here at the exchange, we're not too comfortable with what has happened and with what has transpired. Can you kind of give us a little bit of a rundown?
Yeah, so basically the what I know is Syria has fallen. Bashir al-Assad has fled the country, and the I am, with me being Orthodox, our my patriarch sits in Damascus, Syria.
Right
Uh,
there at the hotbed.
Yep, and the we already had the current metropolitan, who is kind of like the head of the North American archdiocese
Uh huh.
here in this country. His brother was a bishop in Aleppo, which is part of what's called the Christian Valley in Syria, and it
Hmm.
has now been confirmed that his brother has been murdered, was beheaded. As a result. And so now there's new concern that the new bishop of Aleppo is going to be martyred, and the fear is in Syria we're going to have a lot of Christian martyrs in the Antiochian Orthodox Church. So
Well, and anywhere that the Muslims have come in and taken over, we were just talking about how that Christianity, Judeo Christianity, has done more to elevate the standing and the position of women than any religion.
yeah,
And a lot of people want to look at the Pauline epistles, and they want to say, well, Paul was being misogynist, he was being sexist, but actually he was not. He First off, he's dealing with a culture, he's dealing with a group of people, and you don't just go in and change a culture overnight. Because if you do, then you get exactly what we see going on in Syria, and what we saw in the Middle Ages with Constantinople and modern day Turkey.
well, you get a massive culture shock.
You do, and the Muslims come in, and you and I have talked about this. Your ancient Turkish people, a lot of them were lighter skin and lighter hair, but as soon as the Muslims came in and took over, they began to pretty much do what they could to eradicate anyone with those features.
Yeah. So what happened in like when they came into when the Ottoman Turks came into Greece, it was actually a lot much more common to find Greeks who had blonde hair and blue eyes than and I actually have had Greek people tell me this. And what happened is when the Ottoman Turks came in, and what was common practice at the time, and it's a vicious, brutal practice, you would hear about certain activities that would propagate the genetics of the conquerors. And as a result, a lot of the Greeks started in certain regions where the Turks really had a foothold. You would see Greeks through time become, darker, and then they would have dark hair, and they would start. So like the stuff that we kind of look at, and we're like, oh, that person's Greek. Well, that was kind of much more modern than ancient, and um, so it's and a lot of people I know, if they heard this, they get upset about it being politically incorrect or anything, but it's just a fact of history that historians have known that throughout the entirety of our history. You don't really have what a lot of people today would consider pure races. There's no such thing as a pure race, because through years of interbreeding and through years of conquest and what people would do in the methods of conquest, genetics would get kind of mixed up, and you would everybody would eventually become some type of like a mutt of some sort, if you will.
Yeah, and I know I actually had that conversation with somebody several years ago, and she was from Kenya, and I remember her saying that she said, she said the possibility is I have more Caucasian in me than you do. She said it's just that my genetics make my skin darker, and
Sorry.
That's all right. He's got an opinion.
Yeah, he's chiming in. Getty is he's something here.
But it really is. It's more of a, and that is what people don't understand. And you, me, and of course, our listeners are not necessarily, well, there may be a few who will recognize the name Joel Berry, which is going to kind of segue us into the next topic here in a few minutes. But you, me, and Joel Berry, years ago, we were kind of like the Three Musketeers. You saw one of us, you saw the other two.
Yes.
And I just remember us having, a conversation. And I remember Joel making a statement. He said, you cannot fight terrorism the way that America has been trying to fight it, because the terrorists feel as though what they're doing, and you chime in on this a little bit too, Michael, because you've got the military background. You cannot fight it the way that America's been trying to fight it, because you're fighting people that feel as though they have a calling from God to do it.
Yeah, well, I mean, their holy book commands them to.
Yeah.
It's conversion or death. Mm-hmm. And many of the fanaticals, I mean, they hold that to the highest order, like that's what's going to happen. There's also splits within the Muslims,
Mm-hmm.
The Sunnis and Shiites and Wahhabis. Like, they've existed, now since around 700 AD.
Six something, yeah.
It's like right before 700, 695. We're not going to change their culture that quickly.
Yeah.
And bringing them McDonald's and the other great things of America are not going to change their hearts and minds, as Bush so eloquently put it. I think what we've done is we have created much more destabilization and much more of a quagmire in the Middle East.
Yeah.
Like I said, every time we remove one of these so-called dictators, what rises up, it's like a hydra. You get another head, but it's or two, but they're far worse than what you had before.
Yeah.
Right.
And I really feel like that's what we've done. We've done a great disservice to Syria, because now the Christians and women are facing the brunt of our political decisions. Something, and like I said, I really feel like a big part of our push to overthrow Assad was to get at the Russians.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I thought when I heard it.
It's just been this constant nitpicking. Proverbially poking the bear. Like, you can only poke the bear
Literally
so many
and
times
figuratively
before it turns around and mauls you. And I don't know if we want to get into the weeds on this, but the election in Romania, where they had an election and their court threw out the election results because they said it was due to Russian disinformation. Sound familiar?
Oh, yeah. Real close to home there.
And so they completely, even the woman who lost said that she did not agree with the court's decision. But Romania, once again, look at the the interest of NATO. Like, I feel like these are all intertwined,
Yeah.
and it's forcing this conflict between the West and Russia, which is why I really feel like if Putin will just hold out until Trump gets into office, we stand a chance of not having the conflict escalate.
Yeah, because Trump has proven that he's not a president of war. In fact, he doesn't want it. And there's one thing that I know the three of us agree on, and that is that really the part that Russia is attacking, and I know what the left are always going to say, well, yeah, but if we allow him that, then he's going to want to push into Poland and all these other places and rebuild the old Soviet empire. But the part that he's going for in the Ukraine, they want to be a part of Russia anyway.
Yeah, well, there was a peace deal in place, but the U.S. didn't back it, and that would have ceded
That's what they did in Vietnam.
Would have ceded half the captured territory to the Russians.
Yeah.
And Zelensky was saying, we're not going to make a deal. There's no peace.
Yeah.
They're provoking it. There's a lot of provocateurs.
Yeah.
Especially within NATO and within our own government.
Yeah.
I don't know why they're so heavy on Russia. Other than the fact that if we got into a conflict with them, an outright hot war, it would completely, negate a lot of what Trump wants to do getting into office.
Well, what they would do, and the whole point is, like we were talking earlier, they don't have to wait for the whole full 2 years. But all they got to do is try to keep everything sewed up over the next year, because then the year following, they're all going to be wrapped up with their campaigns, for the midterms, and that is what they're hoping to do, and that is why Trump and his team have got to be a lot smarter than this, and that is why. Maybe you've heard something, Justin. I have not heard anything of necessarily where Trump stands on this whole thing with Assad.
I know that he doesn't want to get involved with it, but the person he has appointed to be his head of not national security, but head of intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, she was the one who directly opposed it. Even when she was a Democrat, she opposed the Obama administration's efforts to get into Syria because she understood the situation that's there. And she said we should actually be supporting Assad because Assad. So what happens in the Middle East? I've talked to my godfather a lot about this because at his church they actually have Syrians who go there, and the Syrian Christians support Assad. We're talking like the Catholics, the Orthodox, the other Muslim minorities support Assad, and it's groups like ISIS that don't support him. Well, what happens is in the Middle East, a lot of times you have to have rule by minority. So what happens is they have a situation where everybody else bands together, where you've got like maybe 35 to 40% would be the largest minority. 35 to 40% would actually be the radical Muslims. And so everybody else, the other 60 to 65% of the population, they band together and say, hey, we will all support this guy to keep them at bay. And so what would happen in countries like Syria and indeed even Iraq and other places, they had like no political freedom. Like you could not speak out against those leaders, but they actually had religious freedom. And there are incidences in Syria where the Muslims would send Christians greeting on their holy days, and then the Christians would send Muslims greetings. And then there's also incidences where the state gave up some of its land, so that monasteries and churches could be built on this land. And so it's one of the things a lot of people, they unfortunately don't understand. They think when you look at some of these groups like Al Qaeda and ISIS, that these groups are representative of the majority of Muslims. Well, they're representative of a large enough chunk
Yeah.
to be a problem, but they also persecute these other groups,
Yeah.
these other less violent groups. I mean, you got a whole sect of uh, of Islam called Sufi Islam that
Yeah.
is much more spiritual, and it arose as a rebellion against the caliphates that were basically just being all about greed and selfishness and oppression. And this group rose up. They're like, no, the big jihad we should be facing is the one within ourselves.
Right.
And so they almost kind of have a little bit more of a monastic approach to Islam.
Well, go ahead.
Yeah. So they're, and those guys and gals, they're the ones being persecuted as well.
Sure.
And so it's like, and then you got the Kurds. They're another Muslim group. They're going to be persecuted. It's a really messed up scenario.
Well, I had a boss when I lived there in Nashville. I had a boss who was Kurdish, and one day he and I got into a conversation, and he said, "Do you believe that Israel has a right to all that land?" I said, "I do." And he said, "Well, I do too." He said, "Then why don't the Kurds have a right to our land?" I said, "You do." And he said, "We never wanted the Americans to ever come and fight the war for us. We just wanted them to give us the weapons to fight the war ourselves." And yet, we're willing to give. I am not a fan in the least of little man Zelensky. But at the same time, we're willing to give guys like that weapons who are firing missiles into Russia. And Putin has already said, and at some point, the magic number is going to land and he's going to fire off a nuclear bomb.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, part of the problem is the missiles that we have given them can be used as carriers for a nuclear warhead.
Mm-hmm.
So how do they know it's conventional or nuclear?
Yeah.
Because there had been talks about giving them nuclear weapons, giving the Ukrainians nukes, which, I mean, undoubtedly would spiral into nuclear war.
Yeah.
There's no way around it. Well, when you have these nuclear capable missiles coming in, I mean, imagine if they would have done this during the time of, like, say, Gorbachev and Reagan. Yeah. A flock of geese flying over prompted the Russians to start initiating, firing nuclear weapons because they thought there was an incoming missile.
Right.
And I don't know. I feel like what we've done is a travesty to the world and to our own country.
Yeah.
Because, like I said, you can only go tit for tat so many times before it escalates.
Yeah.
And inevitably, with the way that we're approaching it, or the way our government is approaching it, they're going to force a broader conflict or an escalation, which, God forbid, is nuclear.
Right.
And you have elements of our own government that talk about, surviving nuclear war, or nuclear war won't be that bad. Mm-hmm. It's like, no.
Yeah.
No, it's bad for everyone.
Yeah.
For everything. Like, not just us, but all the animals, the planet. There is no winner in nuclear war.
Mm-hmm. No, there's not. And here's kind of the thing, and of course, I kind of want to segue here in a little bit to the next topic, but Putin said that the next world war would be fought in ones and zeros. And of course, we're talking to, we've got Justin Stevens as our guest if you're just joining. And Justin is, I know you're a computer programmer, is that correct? But I know that's not your actual title.
I started off as a programmer and now I'm a business analyst. So what that does, I'm not writing code anymore, but what I do is help guide and direct programs to completion. So I'm kind of helping navigate the boundaries of programs with actual coders. So I kind of moved up a little bit in the world.
No, that's always a plus when we move up in the world. So I guess the question that I've got here, because you'd be probably best for answering this, when Putin says that the next world war will be fought in ones and zeros, he's talking about a cybersecurity attack.
Oh yeah, we're already we've been fighting it for years, and people don't realize it. It's Because see, what people don't understand about intelligence. I've been listening to a guy named Andrew Bustamante, and he is a former CIA operative. Actually, left the CIA and took the tactics he learned at the CIA and started his own company called Everyday Spy, and now he has a YouTube channel. And one of the things he said is, it is much easier to go into an area and find two groups who are already at odds with each other and just kind of fan the flames. You already have this fire going.
That's what the Green Berets do.
Yeah, it's easier to fan the flames of a current fire that's going than it is to create new fires.
Yeah.
And so every year when we have an election, if let's say you have this Russian, as the media would call it, the Russian disinformation campaign, they don't care which side wins. Yes, they may want, for some reasons, they may want one side to win, and other reasons they may want the other side to win. But rest assured, Russia has a game plan no matter which side wins.
Yeah.
And so what they do is, what they really want more than anything else is they want instability in the U.S. They want chaos, because it's kind of like magicians. If you can get somebody focusing on what's going on over here, the sleight of hand is what is really doing all the work.
Yeah.
So for them, it's great. And you remember about 2 years ago when they had the pipeline attack here, where like the gas just was, like, all the fuel was shut off.
Are you talking about, I think that was in 2014 or 15?
No. I was talking about the one that happened about 2 or 3 years ago, where they hacked.
Oh, yeah. I know which one you're talking about. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I said then, I was like, this was them testing the fence, like the raptors in Jurassic Park, where they just test the fence out to find weak spots. Yeah. They were trying to find a weak spot in our system, and they did. And so that's not going to be the full attack. I mean, our power grid is incredibly weak. It's not magnetically shielded in the right spots, but there's also so much old technology. People consistently, just as much as most people don't like updating their own personal computers, companies, IT departments, employees, they don't like updating their work computers. So there's a lot of stuff that's sitting on old, vulnerable code and platforms that can be easily hacked. And so they just have all these vulnerabilities. The CIA has it. Granted, the FSB will have it. Like every single intelligence agency will have these things.
Well, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say that kind of plays into what Dan Bonagino said about the Secret Service using yesterday's technology.
Yeah.
Today, we're sending billions and billions and billions of dollars around the world. Yeah. Why don't we spend a little of that money here and improve things and make our standing in the world just that much better, make us more secure. We're doing the exact opposite.
Well, you mentioned Tulsi Gabbard, and I had a feeling Tulsi was not going to be behind the whole move on Assad. And the whole move on Assad is because Syria is not a globalist nation. And Russia is not a globalist nation. Now, we can all be, Syria first, Russia first, America first for different reasons. Maybe it's because we want to, make better the lives of our citizens, or we kind of want to spread the Pax Russia, if you will. You had the Pax Romana, the Pax Greco, and the Pax Americana, the peace of, however you want to call it. And we want to spread it in different ways. But at the end of the day, we really do have a globalist versus nationalist ideology. And when I say that, I want to be careful, because the moment you say that and they realize that you may have a little bit of a leaning to the right, he's Nazi, whatever.
Yeah, but they don't realize that a lot of these globalists there are like a lot of national movements that are even are populist movements. I actually think populism is probably a better way to phrase it. There are a lot of left-wing populist movements as well.
Oh yeah, and the thing is, a lot of them are the ones who are running. When I hear all these people say, that, right now a lot of people in the LGBTQ plus community are scared to death that they're going to be rounded up and taken to concentration camps. I know because I've talked to a few of them who are scared of that. And to me, first off, I want to be careful because if it's always easier to attract flies with honey than it is vinegar. But the first thing that I want to come out of my mouth is, I'm sorry to tell you, but you're not that important to the world stage for them to do that. But then I kind of lay back on that and I go, I get the fear because they're going to come back with, well, some could say the Jews weren't either. But we can see all throughout the Bible, the reason why people have hated the Jewish nation, but without getting into the deep weeds of that, the point is that, this has nothing to do with a political party. And that's what I tell people is, hey, yeah, there are people who want to ruin you. They want to destroy you. They want to kill you. But 9 times out of 10, it's not the political party that's sitting in the office. They're just the puppet to the puppet master who's pulling the strings.
Right. And going back to what happened, the reason why the people with in the LGBTQIA plus community really don't have anything to worry about is when Hitler came to power, there was like a lot of economic problems in Germany as a result of the fallout from World War I.
Yeah.
And he was actively blaming the Jews. I mean, it was no big secret that the Jews were at play. There was no bait and switch.
That's what I was getting ready to say.
Yeah.
The final solution, he had not coined that phrase yet, but he was already talking about it well before he ever took power.
Right. And so, and nobody on the right is saying we should get rid of anybody of the LGBTQIA plus community. Everybody on the right is basically having a live and let live attitude. In fact, it's like a lot of lesbians, gays, and bisexuals voted for Trump.
They did.
Because they were it's really been kind of like this militant group that you see where they're pushing this gender ideology and they become cry bullies.
Yeah, you're right. And it again, it's your activists. And that's what we were talking about last week when we had Darren English on the show. The evangelist is the activist of the church. We're not the militant activists, but they are even the Catholics have the, the Jesuits.
Yeah.
And every, regardless of whether you're Catholic, whether you're Orthodox, whether you're Protestant, whatever your faith may be, if you don't have, the evangelist fervor, then you're a dying credo. So even the devil knows that, right? And I'm not trying to place everybody into, but what I'm saying is Jesus said that a kingdom divided cannot stand. So everything knows that if you don't have people out there being active, then your movement's going to die. And like you said, there were many people in the LGBTQI plus community that did vote for Donald Trump, but it is those activists that are trying to continue to stir the flames. You had something, Michael. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to go back to the whole nationalist socialist. That it's a left leaning movement. Mm-hmm. Like you always hear about, radical right wingers, but actual Nazis were leftists. They were. I mean, it's literally in the title, mm-hmm. National Socialist Workers Party. They wanted the same wage for everyone. We've gotten off track. That's become like a slur.
Yeah.
But real conservatives have nothing in common with Nazis.
Yeah.
Ideologically, they are so diverse.
Oh, yeah.
But it's become like the political mudslinging. Mm-hmm. We'll just throw these terms on you, and that immediately makes you volatile.
Yeah.
Or, and people don't understand the actual political spectrum. You have communist, socialist on one side, mm-hmm. et cetera, et cetera. But, comparing our current political climate to something like that, I think is just a scare tactic.
It absolutely is.
My wife has coworkers that were talking about leaving the country because they're afraid. And I'm like, it's simply unneeded.
Yeah.
There's people who are worried about the mass deportations. They're not talking about mom and pop who are just trying to make a couple dollars. They want to get out the 13,000 murderers, the 10,000 rapists. Like, do you really want those people? What about the Venezuelan gangs in Colorado and San Antonio that have taken over entire apartment complexes and they shoot at each other? There's bullet holes.
Yeah.
Do you really want to leave those people here?
Yeah. Well, I mean, Justin, you and I were living in Nashville, because you're still there, but you and I both were living in Nashville back in 2000, was that 17, when the people surrounded the houses and the cars so that ICE could not take them out?
Yeah, it was around that time. Yeah, and then, sorry, go ahead.
But I was just going to say, I mean, it was chaos. It was chaos. And that's why that I say that the politician they are not the ones, they are the puppets on the string. And it kind of going back to what I was talking about with World War, the next World War, Putin saying that it'll be fought with ones and zeros. And this is kind of swinging it in a little bit. And I know some people would say, well, that's conspiracy. But it's kind of swinging it to where you realize that the globalist movement is not ultimately going to win. I mean, it's going to be the kingdom of God. It's going to be Christ himself sitting on the throne. But we know a lot of things have to take place. And something that I was bantering around in conversation last night was with a pastor, and that is, I don't believe that the world will be destroyed with nuclear bombs, because the Antichrist is going to be human. Even the devil cannot do what God does. But I can see where there could be a cybersecurity attack, and based on that, then when everything kind of comes back online, voila, now we have a globalist leader who is now in control of everything. Am I too far off on that?
No, you're spot on. So one of the things that a lot of people don't realize about the Patriot Act is that the Patriot Act,
horrible act.
Yeah, that set everything up, because if you remember, a lot of us, when it first came out, we were all kind of like, yeah, sure, and it was passed really fast. But then we supported it because we had just had 9/11. We didn't know when the next attack was coming from.
Right.
But then, as we started to really see how it was being misused, people started to read the bill.
Mm-hmm.
The problem with some of the people who opposed it, you had some people who opposed the bill who were kind of obnoxious in their opposition.
Mm-hmm.
And they were right, but their presentation was like not necessarily the way that it should have been presented.
Yeah.
And if it had been presented in a different way to a more massive audience, a lot of us who naturally rejected people like Michael Moore would have been like, whoa, this guy's actually saying some stuff that's pretty legit. This is an issue. And
you're talking about John Ashcroft?
No, not John Ashcroft. Talking about the Patriot Act. Even people like, because it was Michael Moore was one of the ones, he came with the whole movie about it.
Yeah.
Then you had other people like Bernie Sanders, and those two guys are very, very left leaning. And a lot of people, there are also people on the right who did not have as big of a mouthpiece, who were like, hey, this is ripe for abuse. And they were sounding the alarm, but they didn't have. Because it was like one of those things. There was just this kind of weird media apparatus in place at the time, where it was like anybody opposed to it were the ones who got the most vocal opposition were very far left people, or not even there. And really, Michael Moore isn't that far left as we would understand far left today, but for the time, he was far left. And but then you get. You just have some other people on the right who would phrase it, but then they were just kind of lumped in with the mass media apparatus of being left-leaning.
Yeah.
But it was like, no, these guys are not traitors to the Republican Party. They're not traitors to the conservative cause. They're actually some of the greater backbones behind it, because it was people like Ron Paul who were opposed.
Well, I was getting ready to mention him. I mean, in all fairness, everybody wants to say Trump, but Ron Paul is the one who started the Ron Paul revolution.
Yeah.
Well, they opened a political Pandora's box.
Yeah.
So if you have one party that creates something like the Patriot Act that does not abuse it, but then you have an oppositional party come in, what's to determine, like, you're now designated a terrorist.
Yeah.
Like you have to think about how these things can be used or abused in the future.
Yeah.
And instead of just having a blanket. The other thing is when the government creates something, they almost never revoke it or take it back. It only
Reagan
grows
said that.
and expands.
Yeah.
9/11 was a long time ago.
Yeah.
There's people alive, adults alive
Yeah.
now who weren't alive when it happened, but we're still continuing with the same political nonsense, and leaving avenues for certain political parties
Right.
to abuse.
Well, my nephew, my sister's son, he asked me one day. He said, "What's so different, after 9/11?" And at first, then I remembered, wait a minute, he wasn't even born when 9/11 happened. So he has no idea what America was like when you just walked into an airport, went and got your ticket, and then you were taken to your plane. You didn't go through all of you didn't go through all that, so I mean, a lot of things changed. And you mentioning the Patriot Act, that's where we really begin to see, because most Americans up to that point, that's where guys like you, me, the three of us, our age was starting to come of age, and we were starting to see the abuses that the government actually was involved in. And I was listening to Newt Gingrich today, Saturday. I was listening to him it was Wednesday or Thursday, and he was talking about how that George W. Bush's dad, he never got Reaganism. So when he got into office, he started moving the country back to Republicanism. And so then you get Ron Paul, which was the Ron Paul Revolution. And of course, then they asked Donald Trump why he ran on the Republican ticket. And I loved his answer. He said, because you're not going to get it otherwise on an independent ticket. And I think that's what RFK realized. But I do think that what Trump has done is he has broadened the tent, if you will, to bring more people in, like the Tulsi Gabbards, like the RFKs, and the people that can start moving things a little bit forward. Even though we don't always agree on everything politically, we're actually seeing what America is all about.
Well, I think that there are people who look at the prosperity and the overall good of the country over the political party.
Yeah.
Which is why you had Tulsi Gabbard and RFK leave, because they felt that their party had diverged too far.
Yeah.
They didn't have the interest of the American people at heart. And I like the idea of having people with different backgrounds or who don't necessarily see eye to eye create an agreement so that we can all benefit. Because if you get too far one direction or too far the other, you're going to marginalize people.
Yeah.
You can't include everyone. I mean, it would be, you can't make everyone happy.
No.
But if we can do a better job of creating a better environment for Americans and more prosperity, I mean, I don't see how you can see anything wrong with that.
No, absolutely not. You still there, or are you gone for a moment? He's gone for a moment. He'll be back. No, I think that is probably the biggest issue, is that people just simply don't see that when one administration does something, it does set a precedent. And then the next, that's why that it's so important that we study administrations to administrations, because of the fact that what that does is it shows us how that America has been affected either negatively or positively, because I mean, slavery is one of them. We were able to get rid of slavery, and we've been able to compound on that, but that goes all the way back to the Lincoln administration. So we can either be positively or negatively affected based on, people say, well, presidents come and go. That's true, but policy stays. And we were talking about, you were mentioning the Patriot Act. People didn't see how it was going to be abused down the line. And then we find out under the Obama administration that phones are being tapped, and we don't find that out until Ed Snowden.
Well, and You have people like Biden now saying that the greatest threat to the country is white
Yeah.
supremacy. It's conservative white people, and I'm going to that I genuinely think there's nothing further from the truth. Or rural Americans are now our
Yeah.
greatest threat. I'm like, do what?
Yeah.
Like, uh, it's gone bonkers. So you have to worry about when these policies or these bits of legislation or executive orders are put in place. What will the implications be for the future? And when the opposing party, because America really and truly is a two-party system, what is going to happen when the opposing party takes power?
All right. So the reason we brought him on, and we have come to that time, it is we are here. That is the king. And there has been a new docu series that has hit Netflix, and man, it is blowing up it is blowing everything up right now.
At least it's blowing up our hometown, or my hometown. Yeah.
I lived there for several years, and I just remember, and I know I probably saw one or maybe both of them, but I remember I worked at Starbucks at the Kroger there at Crosstown. I don't even know if that's still there, but you remember which one, right?
Yeah, yeah. And, the Kroger's there, but the Starbucks isn't there anymore.
Well, so I worked there when that Kroger was there, and it was I don't know what was going on, but it felt like I was in the middle of the movie The Flying Elvises. There was a line of Elvis impersonators, and I'm walking in, and I mean, it's Elvis of every.
Wait, was it around June?
It was right. Yeah, it was right in June.
Oh, it was the Elvis Presley Festival.
And I mean, I'm like, good grief, man. I didn't realize there were so many Elvises, but there was like literally, seemed like a sea of them. And they were all there to get their Starbucks coffee. And anyway, so Netflix comes out with this docu-series called The Kings of Tupelo. Well, that immediately, catches my mind. Well, it has blown up. And a lot of people, like we were talking about, there's been a lot of people that are very upset over, well, they're a little bit upset because they're thinking that it has, really humiliated the town of Tupelo. But it's like Jeff Foxworthy says, look, they don't go to the South and find the best among us. They deliberately look for the worst. But anyway, here's the thing. This kind of ties in with everything else we're talking about. If you've seen it, I don't want to spoil anything, but what you get with it is that basically, if you go back to, was that 2013, 14, and you saw it on 13. Yes. If you kept up with the news, you probably remember this. Do you remember when the letters with ricin was sent to President Obama?
Yes.
I didn't know this until just now, that the guy lived in Tupelo who supposedly is guilty of that. But anyway, Justin, talk to us a little bit about that, because I think you were still living there in Tupelo at the time. I had already moved on. So, I mean, but because for whatever reason, I don't remember a lot of it. I had no idea it came out of Tupelo, but lo and behold, it did.
So yeah, I remember we turn on the news. There are all these talks about Roger Wicker, and so Roger Wicker was our senator at the time. I think he still is, but he's also my family knows him. He was when my parents were going to First Baptist Church in Tupelo. Mm-hmm. He was their Sunday school teacher, and I remember when Roger Wicker first.
Yeah, I've met Roger Wicker.
I remember when he did his first campaign. I went with my dad, and we put up signs in people's yards to help campaign for him.
Yeah.
So like everybody like knew him when he first ran for House, and so. When Trent Lott resigned, Roger Wicker was a natural choice. And we're like, yep, Roger Wicker's going to be the senator. Well, then So he receives this ricin letter, and we all went, okay, this is weird. And then another judge in Mississippi received one as well. Well,
Yep.
Sadie Holland was the judge, and her son ran the Holland funeral services. And so they have like 3 funeral homes. So it was a pretty big deal that we had this big connection there.
Yeah.
And so a few days later, we all get this. Like I was at Starbucks, and one of my friends, Rex Harson, was like, "So," he goes, "Did you see it's an Elvis impersonator that did it?" We went, "What?" And we were like, "Are you serious?" And so we started seeing the reports that the guy was like big into conspiracy theories and stuff. And the biggest conspiracy theory he started talking about, what really got this whole ball rolling towards him being a conspiracy theorist, he alleges that he found a severed head in a freezer in the hospital at North Mississippi Medical Center, which everybody's like, no, he did not.
Well, and
like,
he also alleged that it wasn't just a severed head, but the head had a barcode on it.
yeah, that he said too that they had like other cadavers that they were selling, and everybody, like one of my friends was working at the hospital at the time that allegedly happened. He was like, no, he goes, I've been to the morgue. He said there's not enough space there to keep a severed head.
Everything about it just seems so unrealistic. For entertainment purposes, it's funny, especially like I said, when they're getting ready to get into the karate fight. And and here's the thing so I do remember hearing the name Double Trouble, and which was actually clever because what he did, Elvis had a twin brother, and his twin brother dies at birth, right? So they come up with this really clever idea of having and these are 2 brothers, and they're both Elvis impersonators. And so they have this idea of doing this dual Elvis impersonation, and they call it Double Trouble. Great idea. But the problem is, the one of them, he's just the biggest conspiracy theorist of all time. And I don't think, I will say, I think this is my personal opinion on it. I think a lot of it is, and some of it is a backlash based on the election. It's a hit piece on the South. You think I'm wrong?
Yeah, I see your point. I kind of agree with it a little bit, but at the same time, we were dealing with a true crime story. We weren't dealing with, we weren't dealing with a guy overcoming adversity, which there are plenty of those stories in the South. I mean, they had one a few years ago on Rick Hall. I've seen it. You're talking about it's about
Yeah,
and that guy, he went through a lot of just very, very like horrible things.
Yeah,
to get to where he was in life, and
mm-hmm.
he eventually went from being this well-known jerk to turning his life around and becoming a Christian and becoming very devout about it, and so making amends for the kind of way he had treated people. So, so there are stories like that exist in the South, but man, this story, even then. Because we're sitting there, we're like, it's an Elvis Presley impersonator who was living in Corinth, because I remember that part. And then a few days later, they arrest this martial arts instructor. And we were like, what? And then it gets even more insane when we found out he was also a Wayne Newton impersonator. We're going, oh my gosh, is this a war?
So you got an Elvis impersonator and a Wayne Newton impersonator who are now caught up in what appears to be an assassination attempt on Barack Obama.
Yes, and so it's just like the most insane thing to have happened. And I'm going, how has someone not made a movie about this?
Well, it looks like it's headed that direction. And the thing is when they arrest the Elvis impersonator, they're talking to him about how to make ricin. And he said, well, I don't even eat rice. But you got to say it, because you can say it in the Tupelo vernacular.
He goes, I don't even eat rice.
Yeah. And so the guy's like, well, that right there set for me that he was absolutely innocent of this crime.
He was like going off on how much he hated eating rice.
I'm like, okay, wait a minute. So if you commit a crime and then act like you don't even know how to do it, I mean, and then this other guy, they go and get him. Okay, not only have you got the background in not only have you, and this is where kind of where this was headed with this conversation. One of the things that made the Wayne Newton impersonator the main suspect is because on his now let me set this up. So it's already hit national news that this Elvis impersonator has been arrested for sending a ricin-laced letter to Obama, plus several other politicians, Roger Wicker being one, plus the judge being Judge Sadie Holland.
Sadie Holland, yeah.
Letters that are laced with ricin. Okay, so this has already hit the national news. Okay, from your, I kind of know, I think what you would say from your former police background as well. He becomes a sudden suspect because the one that's actually sitting in jail right now. He becomes a suspect because they find on his laptop hits on ricin. Now, to me, I'm going, that doesn't make you a suspect as much as you have just now heard of some new poison, and so you go and Google search it to see what the possibilities are.
So you would have to look at when it was searched, because you can go back and look and see when that search originated. So if it was prior to the national news leaking or prior to the attacks, it would increase. That in itself is not enough, but it would increase the likelihood, or, like, I would look more closely at that person as a suspect.
So here's, okay. How do you say his name? Is it Dooch or Duce? Is the guy that's
Dutchke, or I think
Dutchke.
they were saying Dutchke, yeah.
Dutchke. Okay, so he's the one who's actually sitting in prison right now with like a 25-year sentence, I believe.
Yes.
Kevin Clark, who calls himself Case.
No, it wasn't Clark. It was Kevin. Hold on. Let's see.
He went by the initials KC. He was the original one. He was the initial one that they were suspect of, because every letter, as you know, gets that barcode at the bottom, so they knew exactly.
Curtis.
Kevin Curtis. You get the barcode at the bottom, and that'll tell you like what town it comes from. So that's how they discover that it comes from Tupelo. Now, if you see the docuseries, to me it just seems like a complete setup, the whole thing. I personally do not think that Dutchke is the suspect. Now, so to kind of go back, here's how I know the names, okay? I never met Holland. Steve Holland is his name, right?
Yes.
I never met him, but I remember his funeral home. Dutchke, I never met him, but his name came up in some circles in the music industry.
Can you?
His name came up in the music industry.
Apologies, that's my notification to take my medicine.
He come up in the music industry, and he had a band. What was the name of it called?
Robodrum.
Robodrum, because he didn't have a drummer. And I remember people that I was connected with at the time that hated the band because they didn't have a drummer. But what he was doing was he was also getting involved in politics, and he was creating a public image. And he says this, I knew I needed to create a public image, and he does. He does it quite well. But I think the biggest thing, and you and I were talking about this before the podcast, Justin, I think the biggest thing is he was an outsider, and a lot of the people in Tupelo were kind of looking at him almost as the carpetbagger type.
Right, yeah. Yeah, it's like, well, because I remember I had conversations with some of the people there, and they didn't like him because, he did run his mouth about some of the other bands and musicians. Yeah. But here's the crazy thing. I know another guy that I trained Taekwondo with, and when Dutchke came to the area, he had humbly gone up to my friend and was like, hey, can you help me prepare for my 5th degree black belt test? He was like, yeah, sure. So my friend had actually had some like very positive encounters with him and had observed him. And he said Dutchke was really good in teaching kids Taekwondo. Mm-hmm. And he was a great kids instructor. He said where he would get off the rails a little bit, the one that would give him trouble would be teaching adults.
Yeah.
And so, as a result, that kind of rubbed people the wrong way. So, and when you look at his background too, of him being CIA and knowing what he had.
Yeah, I was getting ready to. Go ahead.
Yeah, yeah. Because once you're trained CIA, there's like certain characteristics different agents have that can make them either really abrasive or really, really like, hey, we really like this guy. But
well, it goes back to earlier in the podcast where you said that one of the key things they do is they basically it's the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And so if I'm trying to come in and overtake something, I'm going to look at the two warring factions and I'm going to fuel that fire. And that's what he did. And you and I both know the good old boy system in Tupelo, Mississippi. And what I think he was doing is I think he was coming in and really, I mean, he was taking over. I mean, he was literally like coming in and taking over. As a matter of fact, Jim Holland says that he had not had a political rival in, what was it, like 19 years?
Yeah, something like that.
And then this guy comes up and he's running on the Republican ticket against him. And then he starts creating this public image. And, it was kind of a pot shot to mouth off about musicians and bands. And there's still several of them. And I know they listen to this podcast and I don't have any ill will towards them. And I certainly don't think that many of them or any of them had anything to do with this. But at the same time, look, one thing fans love is a good rivalry. And one of the reasons why that larger podcasts would never talk about our podcast is because they're not going to bring attention to it. Just like I wouldn't bring attention to other podcasts. This guy's bringing attention to everything, and it's working for him because he's getting success in the music industry that these other guys aren't.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and one of the things I will say too is that was kind of like Steve Holland has some like classic lines that he says in that. Like I think my favorite quote that we got out of him from that documentary, he's in the middle of this interview and then they're bringing somebody in because he's at his funeral home.
Uh-huh.
And he's bringing somebody in. He's showing the camera their setup, and he goes, "Oh, is that Gladys? I know she had the diabetes."
And you know what, that is picturesque of a lot of southern towns.
I know, it really.
They all know each other, and that's part of. Honestly, that's part of the allure to the South. One thing that Bill Maher said. Bill Maher said, "I love going into," and Bill Maher being of all people. I mean, you were talking about people that like Michael Moore. Bill Clinton, if he ran today, he would not be able to run on the Democrat ticket. Bill Maher said, "I love going into what they call the flyover country or middle America." He said, because if I go into a bar or a restaurant, he said, I know that the person talking to me is talking to me. They're not looking over my shoulder trying to see who the next person is that's coming in so they can go and connect with that person. He said, they're genuinely interested in a conversation with me and getting to know me.
Yeah. Well, it's that small town.
Yeah.
They're not concerned with celebrity the same way that people in big cities are.
No.
Well,
and you being from Texas, you know quite a bit about that.
Well, certain places.
Yeah.
Because, now San Antonio, 2 million
That's
people.
a big leftist city, too.
Houston,
Yeah.
2 point some million or more.
Yeah.
The DFW, Dallas Fort Worth, I forget how many millions are there, but they.
Let's not even talk about Austin.
Yeah, well,
Austin, that's the city I was thinking of, not San Antonio, but Austin.
Yeah.
They're wow.
Well, I never copyrighted this. I probably should. They always had the.
Don't say it.
Yeah.
Until we know. Don't say it.
It's
don't
fine.
give anybody any ideas.
They always had the Keep Austin Weird. And I said, we ought to create a shirt with the fence around Austin and say Keep Austin Contained. But, I never did. But
we probably should.
Never too late.
You probably should.
More irrelevant as more time passes.
Oh yeah, well, it's going to become more relevant, and it's going to catch attention with all the building the fence and everything that everybody keeps talking about. But kind of going back, I mean, of course, this is a little bit off subject, but did you notice anything about the church in that seems awfully familiar?
Which church?
The one that they're all in.
Yeah.
Does that seem familiar to you?
Yeah, it looked like one of the ones that we went to with the Wesley Foundation.
That's what I was thinking when I saw it. I was like, that was like either the last one or the two next to the last one. I think it was probably the second or third next to the last one that we went to for the Wesley Foundation.
The lady who was singing really badly, like right in our ears.
Yes. And when you're trying to play and sing and you've got somebody who you can hear over the music, it's like, okay, we got a problem here. But I'm almost certain that was the one. When I looked at it, I was going, I get it. There's a lot of country churches, but that one stands out. And that's what I thought of when I saw it. That's why I wanted to see if you thought the same thing, because I was going, I know that's got to be the church. Man, there's a lot of churches in that time that we went and played at that I don't even, like, I remember going to them, but if I tried to get in a car and take you to them, I'd have no idea where they were.
Oh, yeah. Well, I remember when one of our friends he got onto he didn't get on alternate 45. He kept going on to regular 45.
That was
Jay.
He's the one who went down to Mississippi State and became the field goal kicker. And that's why they had a horrible season that year, because he kept kicking the alternate route. Yeah, no.
No, Jay would never be caught dead at Mississippi State, man.
Where did he go? I thought that's where he went and
No, he went to Ole Miss.
Ole Miss, that's right. He was down there the same time. I think that not Peyton, but the other Manning brother,
Eli
was down there. That's right. That's when he went down there. But he, he got on the alternate 40 and he went way out of the way because we were waiting on him. He was playing guitar for us that night, wasn't he, or something?
No, he was just showing up. I think that he was just coming
there to support. Okay.
Yes, there to support, but he and like one of the girls who was like really like a cornerstone for one of the things that we were doing.
Yeah, she needed to be there
until it's time to eat.
That's right. Yeah, because we're all sitting there eating, and I call him Brother Tom because that's what we always called him. Still a good friend of ours to this day, and Reverend Tom Potter, huh?
Dude, we've had some pretty funny moments, man.
Reverend Tom Potter, he's the one who made the call out that Jay was showing up just as it was time to eat. But if you're listening, yes, we still remember that, Brother Tom. But anyway, I mean, going back to the Patriot Act, when you see what's going on here, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that you're just going, they have railroaded this guy. I mean, just like because one of the things they find is when they find out who sends the letter, it goes to the initial person, but then all of a sudden they just happen to look and see a latent print at the very top of the corner with this other person's address that leads them to the other person that they want to arrest. And I was talking with Justin before coming on. I said, here's my thought. These three, because it's two brothers, and then one of them was married to one of them, and then I think ended up having an affair with the other brother, something of that nature. It was all messed up. I think those three, and maybe I'll leave their name out of it, but I think those three worked to get this Dushki guy out of the way because he was just coming in and taking over. That's my thought on it. I mean, and of course I know people are going, why are you talking about this? Because right now it's a huge issue, and it's a big documentary. And I think it was designed. I think they got the guy out of the way, and I think him being former CIA. Did you get to finish it?
I did, and I saw where Kevin Curtis was like, I even think he was the fall. Like talking about Dutchke, he was like, I even think he was the fall guy, and I'm like, okay, that's a legit point that could be made.
Well, he claims to have some kind of bad information, like some kind of devastating information on Barack Obama.
Yeah, and so there's an actual book about this, about the prosecution of Dutchke, and one of the things and it talks about kind of like how his constitutional rights were violated, and one of the things that they did is Barack Obama used a very rare authority on him called SAM, and I can't remember what it stands for, but basically,
You might know what it is. You don't?
Not a clue.
But it has like national security implications to it. And so basically, when someone is declared one of these types of persons, their entire constitutional rights are suspended. They don't get a right to attorney. They don't get a fair and speedy trial. They can be locked up indefinitely. They don't get to speak to family members. So Dutch
Is that the same thing they used on the J6 guys?
It could be. I don't know. But it wouldn't surprise me if it was for some of the more high profile guys. It wouldn't surprise me if that's what they used. And so they did that, and then other like 3 girls came forward later and accused Dutchke of sexual assault.
Yeah.
And so the thing that's so crazy about that is I know people who claim that they know people who were affected by them, but nobody's telling me any of the details.
Well, I mean, you know that city as well as I do. In fact, again, something else you and I were discussing, and my sister, I'm sure, is listening. She'll remember this. In fact, I think it was me, her, and her now husband. I think they were just dating at the time. And there was another person with us, and we're sitting at a red light right there where O'Charlie, that red light where O'Charlie's is at.
Yes.
And all of a sudden, boom, we get popped. We get rear-ended. Well, there's this black Range Rover. I'll never forget what the car was. It was a black Range Rover, and they pull over into the O'Charlie's restaurant. And I went ahead and I jotted the license plate down, the plate number. And because I thought they were going to take off, is what I thought. But they pulled off. Well, I already had the plate number. This lady comes running over, and she's like, "Are you guys okay? Are you guys okay?" And we're like, "Yeah, we're fine." She turns around, so we're thinking, okay, she's going to get her insurance. She gets in her car, and they take off. So now the police show up. Tupelo Police Department shows up, and I said, "Hey, here's the plate number." I gave it to him. He comes back 3 or 4 minutes later. He says, "That plate doesn't exist." I'm like, "That's the plate number. Maybe you missed something." I said, "I absolutely did not miss anything. That's the plate number." And like you and I were talking, they were protecting somebody.
Oh yeah. Well, and then there was a situation that happened with my graduating class. There was a guy. I'm not going to name names, but there was a guy. He dropped out and got his GED, but then he got to walk at our graduation. And because his mom was connected to one of the most prominent families in that town.
Their name is actually on a billboard in the docuseries.
Yep. And so when I was sitting next to a girl at my graduation, and I hadn't spoken to this girl in years, and our names were like, I was like, "Hey, how's it going?" And she's like, "Hey." So we're just sitting next to each other, and she said, she saw him walk. She goes, "That is not fair." And I looked at her. I was like, "What?" And she explained it to me. And I was like, "That tracks for this town." I mean, that's why, like, when I think one of the things that amongst the values that I did pick up from Tupelo, because I think the majority came from that town. As much as I hated growing up there, the majority of who I am, came from there. And I also learned that there are certain things that are well beyond my control. And
that's in every walk of life,
Yeah, and it taught me how to accept it and not let it bother me.
Sure.
And I knew that there's also this high class of people that no matter how successful I were to become, no matter what I do in life, I would never be accepted by. So that kind of put this more defiant attitude in me where I'm like, okay, I'm going to do whatever I want. And if these people like it, fine. If they don't like it, who cares?
Yeah.
They don't have to live my life. They're not the ones who are going to be held accountable for it.
Yeah. No, absolutely right. And that is really it in a nutshell. I mean, right there in Nashville's biggest city as that is, there's so much stuff. Excuse me. There's so much stuff that's just going to be out of your control, and you know, it's not about you going through it. It's about what you do while you're going through it. And the thing about Tupelo is Tupelo. I enjoy it. I don't hate the town of Tupelo. I don't think like I said, I think there is some hit piece on it, but I think some of it is, like you said, it's a crime drama, and they're just pointing out something that it hit national news. And as a minister, I have spoke in a few churches in that town, and I would go back again. I mean, I'd go back to those churches or any other church. So I have no issue with the town of Tupelo. It's a nice town. It's just anywhere you go, you're going to find that there are people that are in charge of it. I mean, we got it right here in Little Rock. I mean, right here in Conway. I mean, you've got one internet provider, and nobody else comes into this town. That's who you use. And I don't know how that works, because there's a law against monopoly, but those are things that are out of your control, like you're saying.
Oh, absolutely. And one of the things that it did kind of also show me too is that there are people that you can always find that you can relate to, but also it did teach me how to relate to as many people as possible.
Yeah.
So, like, I cannot stand the Dave Matthews Band.
I can't stand them.
But there are people in Tupelo, like, that's their favorite band. But there are other things I can connect with them on. I just don't talk about Rush to them, and they don't talk to me about Dave Matthews. But we talk about so many other things, because there are other, like, if it's music, there are other bands that we like. Yeah. And we get along, and there are other topics that we can get along well. Yeah. And so it really did say, like I said, it did. There were a lot of weird politics that you have to learn coming up in Tupelo, but I think overall it really was a good scenario. Now, would I want to raise, if I were to ever have kids, would I want to raise my kids in that town? No, because my family history. I just like, even my mom was like, "I love you, but you can never move back to this town." She was like, "This town is good for you." And so, like, going back to the thing with Dutchkey, I'm kind of a little bit torn on the fact that, because I've had family members who were affected by, some horrible, horrible crimes. Yeah. But also at the same time, I've had friends who were falsely accused of crimes. So I've seen kind of what happens when you have an innocent man who's falsely accused, and then when you have a guilty man who is rightfully accused and does deserve to go to prison. So I've seen kind of both sides of that coin. But the stuff, like I set one girl off because I just said, look, the documentary is entertaining, but I was like, but didn't Dutchkey take the plea bargain in order to not get charged as a sex offender? And she just toward me was like, you need to shut your mouth. You don't know what you're talking about. I was like, that's why I asked the question. We're not allowed to ask questions anymore.
Well, going back, I mean, you guys have seen where the girl from the Duke lacrosse case back in 2006 has now come forward and said that she lied on those young men. And at the time,
it was like 5 minutes to figure out.
Yeah. I mean, even the courts back then said these guys they're innocent. But, she's supposedly become a Christian, and I hope that she has, and maybe that's what has convicted her. But at the same time, you're going, you destroyed these guys' lives.
Yeah, well, they were destroyed in the court of public opinion. Yeah. And that's something they have to carry for the rest of their lives. Yeah. That will never go away. It's like the Bible talks about the fires of the tongue. It's really easy to start a fire. Yeah. It's hard to undo the damage.
Yeah. Well, I can't remember who the minister was. It was one of the older ministers, like one of your more, like from history. I want to talk. It was someone like D.L. Moody, but I don't think it was him. But anyway, had a woman come to him and talking about, she had made up lies about somebody and this, that, and the other. And he said, I just want to go and I want to take all that back and just make it like it never happened. He goes, okay, here's what I want you to do. He said, I want you to go to the top of this hill. It was really windy up there. He said, I want you to take a bag of feathers and I want you just to go, throw all those feathers to the wind. So she did. He says, now go pick every one of them up. She says, I can't do that. He goes, nor can you retract all the lies that you've told. You have to go and you have to make it right. You have to ask them to forgive you. And then you have to understand something, that your tongue can destroy people. And that's what people don't understand. And we live in a society where, the woman is to be believed regardless. Now, I think some of that is kind of starting to dissipate, because I think some women are going, hey, I've got a son, I've got a husband, but,
Yeah.
but because there's a lot of women who are coming out and speaking out against that. And it's the same thing with like what we're talking about with Dusky. I mean, I'm not just going to believe that the man assaulted a woman because, like you said earlier in our conversation, we're hearing this from third parties. We're not hearing this from the horse's mouth, as they say.
Yeah, and there's like no details anybody's telling me. They're saying it, and because now one of my sources, I talked to him about it, and one of the alleged sexual assault accounts. My friend asked him about it, and he said I was correcting someone's technique. And when someone's doing a kick, especially with Taekwondo, with everything being so focused on kicks,
Yeah.
Even if you watch the footage of Dutchke, you see him doing punches and strikes, but man, Taekwondo still has a heavy reliance on kicks.
Yeah.
And so when someone's not doing a kick right, and you're a martial arts instructor, they may have their butt poking out a little bit. So what you have to do is like you grab their leg, and then you push their hips forward, keeping their leg in place.
Yeah.
Well, according to my source, he said that's one of the charges. They said that was one of the things that they said was assault. And so, and I'm not trying to discredit, because I'm like, look, if it's really true that he did assault those young girls, he deserves to be punished for it.
Yeah.
There should be no alleviation from it. But at the same time, if that's what it was, every single martial arts instructor should be scared to death, because what happens, like, especially with something like jiu-jitsu, where it's like grappling and, your sweat's like, sweat gets in your eyes and you're grabbing, you can accidentally grab the wrong thing on somebody.
Well, I mean, so kind of talking about that, and Michael, I mean, I think you're going to know this too. Someone says, well, why don't you just have the guys practice with the guys, the girls practice with the girls? The point of it is so that if a guy attacks a girl,
that's not realistic for the real world.
Yeah.
A woman is more likely to face a male aggressor.
Mm-hmm.
So with the police department, we did jiu-jitsu, and like being in guard, like full guard, it's
it looks kind of off. Let's just say that.
Exactly. I mean, it looks like a sexual position.
Yeah.
But the thing is, you have to learn, like, fighting is not choreographed. The American public has this perception of how a fight should look.
Yeah.
It's not realistic.
Mm-hmm.
When you fight someone on the streets, it's not pretty. These things are about like jiu-jitsu, taekwondo. It's about learning a technique, and the only way to do that is to actually spar. And sometimes there will be some points of, I guess, it would be uncomfortable or awkward, but it's far better to learn it there than to learn it on the street when you're getting whooped.
Yeah.
So you have to put that aside, and it's only of sexual nature if you make it that way. And that's, like when I went through the police academy, we did ground fighting with the state police, and they did try to pair the women up with other women. There was one woman who came to work for Conway, and there were no other women for her to pair up with, so I was her partner for it. But, like, it's only awkward if you make it awkward.
Yeah. And that can be anything, right?
Oh, absolutely.
That can be anything. Of course, I think, we're kind of running out of time here, but This one's went over a lot longer, but it's good. I mean, we got a guest on, so I mean, it's fine. I mean, podcasts can go for a while, but yeah, I think that a lot of it comes down to, at the end of the day, it's not that I'm not gonna say don't trust your government. I'm not gonna say that. What I am gonna say is this: don't trust your government to do for you what God has given you the ability to do for yourself.
Well, I think that everything should be viewed with a healthy dose of skepticism.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes from the government.
Yeah.
I personally don't believe that they always have your best interest at heart.
No.
Many politicians are, I mean, let's be honest, they're in there for the power, the influence, and to get rich. They don't care what happens to you.
Yeah.
I would love to believe that they are looking out for us. They're trying to make our country safer, but their actions speak
louder than words.
Exactly. And so I think you should view it as not what they say, but what they actually do.
Yeah.
Just like with any other entity or person or organization.
Yeah. Well, go ahead.
I've got a friend who said politics is the entertainment industry for ugly people.
That's a perfect analogy right there, and that is the truth. Hey, Justin, thank you, man, for coming and joining us on the Exchange Politics the Exchange Podcast. It has been a really good exchange, been a good conversation, and thanks again for joining us, man.
All right, thanks for inviting me, man. I appreciate it.
All right, sure will, and you have a good one. We hear you. You have a good one, man.
All right, you
Right. All right. That brings us to the end of another Exchange podcast. Michael?
Well, we really appreciate your support. We appreciate you listening. Really appreciate the guests. That was really a lot of fun. Like I said, view everything with a healthy dose of skepticism. People don't always have your best interest at heart.
Yeah.
But ultimately, we can't rely on the government or even our fellow man. There's only one way, only one truth, and one way to life, and that's Jesus.
That's right.
Don't place your faith so heavily in the things of this world, or you'll end up getting lost.
That's absolutely right. And there, as you said, there is only one way. Jesus said, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but by me, and anyone else is the same as a thief and a liar. Put your trust in him. You can't go wrong. Thank you for joining this exchange. Like, subscribe, and share. Don't forget, we will not be back here. We're not going to be here next week. We will not be back here for another exchange podcast until I'm going to pull up that. It will be, let's see, we're not going to do the next Saturday because that's Christmas. We're probably looking somewhere around the 11th before the next podcast. Don't forget, we are at episode 94. That means 6 episodes out from 100. We got something special planned for that. I'm going to keep an eye on it. 94, 6 episodes takes a lot longer in the podcast world, doing it week by week, than what you would think. But 100 is coming up. Save it. Come and join us and have a good one, and we will see you here on the 11th of January. Until then, have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.